I don't think the student has any particular clear answer to that. That's a hard question. So that's a problem. And or rather maybe because there's enough moral here that that's probably
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for being here with us. I'm Daniel Campos. I'm the chairperson of the Philosophy Department at Brooklyn College. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this year's Sprague and Taylor lecture. The Philosophy Department has hosted an annual philosophy lecture each spring since 1950. In 1997, this lecture series was renamed the Sprague and Taylor Lecture in honor of two distinguished emeriti of our department, Professors Elmer Sprague and Paul Taylor, who taught at Brooklyn College for over 40 years. The Sprague and Taylor Lecture has always been one of the highlights for the faculty and our majors, as it has given our community the opportunity to bring in an impressive array of experts from a range of subfields in philosophy. Speakers at past annual lectures have included such notable scholars as Anthony Appiah, Peter Singer, Charles Mills, Catherine Wilson, and Louis Gordon. In the recent past, lectures have been given by such distinguished philosophers as Virginia Held, Christian Mercer, Jason Stanley, Miranda Fricker, Rebecca Kukla, Dean Zimmerman, Michelle Moody Adams, and David Chalmers. This year's Sprague and Taylor lecture will be given by distinguished Professor Lara Buchak, who is here with us. Professor Buchak is professor in the philosophy department at Princeton University. Her research includes decision theory, social choice theory, ethics, and the philosophy of religion. She has also written Risk and Rationality, a book on how an individual ought to take risk into account when making decisions. She's also mother to lovely baby Nathan, who's 10 months old, and who is visiting us at Brooklyn College as well. Right now, I believe he's at the chairperson's office, with Grace. We're very honored to have Professor Buchak here today to give this year's Sprague and Taylor lecture. It's particularly important for us this year because it's the first time we hold a lecture in person in 4 years, since 2019. And so it's very nice to be here together. And she has been wonderful and generous and enthusiastic about being on campus with us, faculty, with students, and that's very meaningful. At all philosophy events this semester, we have also recognized that our events are held at the unceded territory of the Lenape people, and so it's meaningful also to recognize that we are all gathering in territories that are property of the Lenape people. Without further ado, we're pleased and honored to have Professor Buchak with us, who will give us our lecture. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you all for being here. It's a great pleasure to be here in person, and thanks for coming and listening. So, the title of my talk is Faith and Rational Deference to Authority, and I want to answer 3 questions here. First, what does it mean to have faith in some claim? I'm here talking about not just religious faith, but mundane faith. So, you might have faith in God, but you also might have faith in a friend, or faith that your friend will do something for you. Second, how does having faith relate to deferring to an authority? And when is it a good idea to have faith? And when is it a good idea to defer to an authority? And finally, should you believe what an authority says, even if reasoning through the matter yourself, you think the authority is wrong? This is sort of a classic debate in epistemology. It's sort of two debates. One is like, what is the role of testimony in your forming beliefs? Is testimony like just another piece of evidence, or do we do something else with testimony? And I'm going to argue that we do something else with testimony. We sort of defer to it regardless of what we think the evidence says, or in certain cases we should do so. And the other debate is about whether you ought to always be the authority on what to believe, or whether you should sometimes farm that out to other people. And I'm going to be arguing sometimes you should farm that out to other people. So sometimes you should believe what someone else says, even if you think they're wrong. So somewhat surprising and controversial. And finally, I'm going to talk about a number of cases in which we do or maybe should rely on authorities and explain why it's actually rational to do so in those cases. So why, when people in fact do rely on authorities, they're often doing the thing they should be. Okay. So just to start out with my account of faith. So this is like the sort of background, the topic that I've been working on for a while. What does it mean to have faith? And the sort of new bit for today is applying this to the case of deferring to an authority. Okay. So what philosophers are trying to do when they give an account of faith is to try to capture classic cases of faith across many domains. So cases of religious faith, like Moses leading his people out of Egypt and journeying through the desert. That's a classic case in which Moses is said to have faith. Mundane cases of faith. So I have faith in my friend, I tell her my secrets. So we want to capture what people are doing in these cases when they have faith. We also want to capture the use of faith in ordinary language. So for example, if I say, I have faith that you will stop smoking, that seems like a thing that we might say. If we say, I have faith that you will continue smoking, that's like an odd thing to say. So we want to sort of say why is the first thing like a reasonable thing to say, and the second thing an odd thing to say. Okay. So 2 bits of my account. First, only certain claims are candidates for faith in the first place. So in order to be a candidate for faith, in order to be something that I can either have faith in or not have faith in, a claim has to be something that my evidence alone doesn't make me certain about. So for example, I wouldn't say, I have faith that 1 + 1 = 2, because that's just something I'm certain about. If I say that, it's odd. You think, like, what do you mean? Is there some, like, reason it wouldn't? Or if it makes perfect sense to tell my friend, oh, I have faith that you will pass the test later today. If they come to me and show me their passing grade, it doesn't really make sense to say, I have faith that you passed. I already know that you passed. Okay, so that's like one criteria. The other criteria is that in order for a claim to be a candidate for faith, I have to have a positive attitude towards it. I have to think it's like a good thing. So I can have faith that you will stop smoking, but I can't have faith that you will continue smoking. It's not that I lack faith that you'll continue smoking. It's just not an appropriate thing to have faith in. Okay, so here's my account. Take these claims that you might have faith in. Here's what it is when you do have faith in one. I call it the risky commitment account. So to have faith in a claim is to be willing to commit to take risks on that claim without regard for additional evidence, and to follow through, or to be willing to follow through on taking these risks, even if you get evidence against the truth of the claim. So two bits. You have to be poised to take a risk. You have to be willing to do so without more evidence, and even if you get evidence to the contrary, you have to follow through on that risk. So to take some examples, let's say I have faith that my friend will keep my secrets. I'm willing to take the risk of telling my friend a secret. That's a risk, because if she spills it, that's bad, but if she keeps it, that's good. I'm willing to do so without first asking a third party, do you think my friend is trustworthy? And even if somebody else comes up to me and says, hey, I think your friend is kind of a gossip, I'm willing to ignore them and tell my friend the secret anyway. Or to take a religious example, if Moses has faith that he should do what God says. When God commands him to leave Egypt, he does it. That's a risk, because if it's not going to work out, it's a supremely bad idea. He does so even though there's some evidence that he might not succeed. So Pharaoh keeps, if you know the story, Pharaoh keeps saying, like, sure, you can leave, and then he takes it back and says, no, you can't. Moses doesn't need to wait to hear what Pharaoh says, and he takes this risk even when he gets pretty significant evidence. Okay, so that's what it is to have faith in a claim. You got to be willing to act on it, to take a risk on it, without looking at more evidence, and even if you get evidence to the contrary. And there's a particularly important case of faith that I'm going to talk about here. And that's faith that a testifier pronounces correctly, or faith that something an authority says is true or is a good idea. So let's look at the risky commitment account. According to the risky commitment account, if an individual has faith that a testifier pronounces correctly in some matter, then the individual has to be willing to commit to take a risk on the basis of what the testifier says, and to continue with this risk even if she gets evidence to the contrary. Okay, but what's one salient kind of evidence is what I myself think in the matter. I could look for the further evidence of what conclusion I myself would come to if I reasoned through it, and some counter evidence I could get is that I would come to a different conclusion. So if I have faith in a testifier, I have to listen to that testifier without thinking through the matter myself, and I have to be willing to continue to listen to her, even if I think through the matter myself and come to a different conclusion. Okay, so here's the account that emerges. Call this the testimonial deference account. To have faith in an authority is to act, or to be willing to act, on the basis of the authority's claims, even if your own reasoning about these pronouncements is silent or implies that you shouldn't act. To have faith that a claim holds is to act on this claim because one has faith in an entity. So for me to say my friend gives me some directions about how to get to campus, for me to have faith in her as a testifier is for me to take her word for it and to follow her directions, even if I think through it myself and think that's actually not the right way to go. Okay. So this is just an account of what it is to have faith. But I haven't said, is this a good or a bad idea? And that's something we want to know. Should we defer to people in this way? Should we ever have faith in a testifier? If so, when? So I'm going to argue that, in fact, sometimes it's rational, sometimes it's a good idea to have faith in a testifier, and sometimes it's not. And we can delineate the conditions in which it is and say why they hold. And what will emerge is sort of the reasons and the circumstances under which we should have faith in a testifier. Okay. So I work in an area called decision theory. A sort of hallmark of decision theory is to try to formalize, make mathematical, various elements of a decision, and then use those to say what we should do. So two important elements of a decision are how likely you think various states of the world are. So take a decision like, should I bring my umbrella today? Two things that are relevant. How likely is it to rain? How much do I care about getting wet? So decision theorists call these probabilities and utilities. Probabilities are how likely something is. Utilities are how good is it for me to end up in a certain state doing a certain action? How good is it to me to end up in the rain not carrying an umbrella? So this is probably over, when decision theorists do this, they're making mathematical things that aren't that precise. But the point of these models is to be able to look at something if it really was precise, and then draw from that lessons about the actual case. Okay. So let's say an individual faces a choice between two actions, one of which is a risk on some claim, in the sense that the action will turn out better than the safe alternative if the claim holds, but worse than the safe alternative if it doesn't hurt. And let's also say that there's a benefit to committing to act, or to acting now rather than postponing. So let's just take a risky choice, for example, should I take some particular medical treatment with side effects? So let's assume the safe thing is to take no treatment, or maybe to take the known treatment. The safe action, don't take the treatment. Let's say it's kind of the same either way. We'll just to put a number on it, we'll say like, it gives you level 3, utility 3. On the other hand, taking the treatment is risky. If the treatment would be a success, that's better, so it gives you utility 4. If the treatment would be a failure, it gives you 0. See, these are just numbers to sort of like think about. The numbers don't need to mean anything. They're like, what's the magnitude of the things involved? Like treatment is, taking the treatment is better if it would be a success. Taking the treatment is bad if it would be a failure, and it's like much more bad than taking it would be a success. Okay. So I want to know what to do, and let's say an authority tells me, take the treatment. And let's also say the authority is pretty reliable. 90% of the time, she's right. Okay. So if this is the decision I faced, I should just take the treatment. But what we're interested in is the following question. Should I just act on the authority's advice, or should I instead first think it through by myself and then act on what my probabilities are after I think it through myself? So here's how we set up the choice. There are 2 cases here. The first one's a lot simpler. The first case is, let's say, if I reason through the matter myself and I disagree with the authority, then I would do the risky act anyway. So for example, let's say, right now I think 90% chance the treatment is successful. Let's say I'm like not very good at medical reasoning. I don't really know that much. If I were to reason through it myself and decide if it was a bad idea, my probability wouldn't lower that much. Maybe it would go down to 80%. But given like the numbers, I still do better on average by taking the treatment. So in this first case, like no matter what I think, it's better to take the treatment. We'll talk about that case. It's like slightly boring, but it's worth going through. The second case is more interesting. And that's a case in which if I did reason through the matter myself and disagree with the medical authority, then I wouldn't actually do the act in question. So let's say I'm like somewhat good at medical reasoning. In fact, if I disagree with the authority, now I think there's only a 50% chance that the authority is right. That's low enough that I'm going to stick with the safe treatment. Okay. So there are 2 cases, one in which my reasoning, while it changes my probabilities, doesn't really make a difference to what action is good. And second case, more interesting case, my reasoning to the conclusion that the authority is wrong really would make a difference to what I do. Okay, so in the first case, let's see what the payoffs are. So there are 4 possibilities. Either I agree with the authority and the authority is correct, I disagree and the authority is correct, I agree and the authority is wrong, or I disagree and the authority is wrong. So here, I'm going to do the same action either way. So the payoffs are the same whether I first reason about what to do or not, except let's assume that there's some benefit to committing to act rather than reasoning through it myself. For example, maybe things would be much better if I started the treatment now. Or maybe once I commit to the treatment, it's better if I see it all the way through. So we represent that by just adding a 1 to the cases in which the authority is correct, and I defer to the authority without first looking for more evidence. Okay, so in this case, that's why I say this is like sort of an obvious case. In this case, it's just straightforwardly better to defer to the authority, right? You're gonna take the treatment either way, but it's better to take it now, or it's better to commit to it. Okay, that's the first case. Second case, slightly more interesting case. If I reason through the matter myself and disagree with the authority, then I won't do the risky act. Then I'll just take the safe course of treatment or not take the treatment at all. So how do my actions change based on my reasoning? Well, again, if I defer to the authority about what I should do, we can think, if the authority is correct, I get the benefit of taking the drug plus the benefit of committing to it now. So again, 4 plus 1, 5, in cases in which the authority is correct, whether or not I agree with the authority. But if I decide I'm going to reason through the matter myself, and if I agree with the authority, I'll take the drug. If I disagree with the authority, I won't take the drug. Now my action depends on what my reasoning is. So if I agree with the authority, I'm going to take the drug, which means I get 4 in the case in which the authority is right and 0 in the case in which she's wrong. But if I reason through the matter myself and decide that I disagree with the authority, then I take the safe course of action, so I just get the safe payoff of 3, no matter what. Okay. Hope that's pretty clear. If not, feel free to ask me about it in Q&A. So now, setting up the problem this way, we can see that there's some advantages of following the authority, and there's some disadvantages of following the authority. So advantages are just basically like, in certain states of the world, you do better. Disadvantages, in certain states of the world, you do worse. So one advantage of following the authority, rather than reasoning through the matter yourself, if the authority is correct and you would agree with them, then you get the benefits of committing or acting now. And that's an advantage that's going to take place in the case in which you agree with the authority and they're correct. So if you reason through it and you agree with them and you're correct, it would be better, and they're correct, sorry, it would be better to just defer to them in the first place. Second advantage, if the authority is correct, but you wouldn't agree with them, then by following the authority rather than yourself, you get the benefits of not talking yourself out of the correct action. So that's the thing in the column, I disagree with the authority, but the authority is correct. So in that case, you do better by following the authority than yourself because the authority is correct and you're not. Okay. Disadvantages of following the authority. Well, if the authority is wrong and you would disagree with them, then if instead you follow yourself, you get the benefits of talking yourself out of the incorrect action. So you do the safe course, and the safe course is actually better. Okay. So overall, what things should you do? Well, it depends on the size of the benefits and the probability of receiving each of these benefits. So the probability of being in the state, I agree with the authority and the authority is correct. The probability of being in the state, I agree with the authority and the authority is wrong, and so forth. And we can say something pretty general, which is that the benefits of deferring to the authority rather than reasoning through it on my own outweigh, so the benefits of deferring to the authority are higher if the following 3 conditions all hold. First condition, call it the reliability condition. This says that the probability that the authority is correct is sufficiently high. So the probability that the course of the medical treatment works, given that the authority testifies that the medical treatment works, is high. So for example, 90% of the time when the authority testifies, she's correct. Second condition, the inconclusiveness condition. This says that even if I disagree with the authority, the authority still has a pretty good chance of being correct. So for example, 50% of the time when the authority says something and I disagree with them, the authority is right. So I'm right 50% of the time, but she's right 50% of the time. So this condition will basically hold when the benefits, this says like the possibility that what you're going to do when you reason is like talk yourself out of the correct action is pretty high. Finally, the situation condition. So there are benefits to be gained from committing to take a risk on the claim or from taking the risk now before thinking through the matter yourself if the claim holds. And these benefits couldn't be gained from merely taking the risk. And you have to actually follow through on the commitment in order to get these benefits or avoid paying the cost of backing out. So in other words, this is like the condition that says we can put a 1, we can add a 1 in the case in which you commit. So there are benefits to committing or to doing the thing now. Okay, so if these 3 conditions all hold, then you will do better by deferring to the authority about what you should do rather than reasoning through the matter yourself and then making a decision. So if you think these conditions hold in the case of someone prescribing you medical treatment, you should just follow what they say rather than first thinking through it and researching it on your own, because on average, you will end up better off. Okay. And in other words, it's sometimes rational to defer to an authority about what to do without reasoning through the matter yourself, and to continue to defer even if you do reason through the matter yourself and come to a different conclusion than the authority. And the reason, as we can kind of see from thinking about the 4 possible states of the world, is that while thinking through the matter yourself can sometimes talk you out of taking a bad risk, often it can talk you out of taking a good risk too, and it can keep you from reaping the benefits of committing or acting now. Okay, so I've just argued that sometimes it's rational to defer to an authority about what to do. But what about the case of belief? Should I ever defer to an authority about what to believe, or should I just defer to them in the case of action? Like, should I say, all right, well, medical practitioner, I don't know if you're right or wrong, I'll do what you say, even though I don't believe. So I'm going to argue yes, sometimes it's rational to defer to an authority about what to believe, even if reasoning through the matter yourself, you come to a different conclusion. So start by noticing that believing X is taking a risk on X. So believing some claim is taking a risk on it. So looking at this first chart on page 1, if you replace take the treatment with believe some claim, and replace don't take the treatment with be agnostic, we can sort of come up with what we might call the cognitive utility of various states of the world. If you believe some claim and it's true, you get a good payoff, say 4. If you believe some claim and it's false, you get a bad payoff, say 0. But if you're agnostic, you get some payoff in the middle, say 3. So given that we have the same setup and the same payoffs, we're again going to conclude that there are benefits to committing to believe a claim, that there are benefits to deferring to an authority about what to believe rather than thinking through the matter yourself. And these benefits are going to obtain in the same 3 conditions I've just listed, the reliability condition, the inconclusiveness condition, and the situation condition. In other words, if the person you're thinking about believing is very reliable in the domain, if they say something, 90% chance they're right, if your reasoning through the matter yourself would result in inconclusiveness, so even if you end up disagreeing with the authority, there's still a 50% chance they're right. And finally, if there's some benefits to be gained from believing now or from committing to believe regardless of what your future evidence tells you. So the first 2 conditions are somewhat straightforward, but I want to talk a little bit more about this 3rd condition in the case of belief. So when, if ever, are there benefits to committing to believe a claim rather than just believing it if you think you have the evidence for it and not believing it if you don't? Well, there are 2 cases in which I think it's better to commit to holding certain beliefs. One is the case of claims concerning matters in which it's better to have an unwavering belief in the truth. So think about interpersonal claims. So think about beliefs I might hold about a friend. I believe that my friend is loving. I believe that my friend is reliable. Maybe I believe that my spouse would never betray me. These kinds of interpersonal beliefs. It seems like it's much better to, if they're true, to just believe them at every time, rather than to have the following pattern of belief. Oh, sometimes I believe it, sometimes I don't. My evidence in favor of it is high, I believe it. My evidence goes down, I don't. If you were a friend, you'd rather have your friend just always believe of you that you're reliable than to sometimes believe it and sometimes not. So that's one case in which there are benefits to committing to believe a claim rather than to just sort of like believing it at a time or not. Another kinds of claims in which there are benefits to committing to believe it are claims that we might call core claims of scientific, religious, or moral tradition. So think about a scientific tradition or a religious tradition. In the case of like some claims of a scientific tradition are sort of peripheral. So like, I don't know, what is the like exact gravity constant or something like that. That's something that's not like fundamental to some research program, but the idea that gravity operates in a certain way is like a core claim. It's a claim that informs a lot of other research. Or think about, in the case of a religious tradition, maybe the claim that, I don't know, you should go to church on a Sunday rather than a Saturday. That's maybe a peripheral claim to Christianity, but a central claim to Christianity is like the things the Bible says are more or less true, something like that. So distinguish between central claims and peripheral claims. Central claims are claims upon which a lot of reasoning is based. So you sort of like just assume the truth of the claim in order to figure some things out. So scientists just like assume gravity works in a certain way in order to like figure out values of various constants. Christians just assume that the Bible is like basically true in order to figure out some other things about what they should do. So there are benefits to being committed to one of these core claims. For example, if I'm a scientist and I just commit to the idea that gravity works in this particular way, then I don't have to like clutter up my mind with other possible ways in which gravity might work. Similarly, if I'm and I just commit to the claims the Bible makes, then I don't have to like think about, oh, well, here are these like many other religions that might also be true. I don't have to sort of like think about, well, if this one is true, what should I do? If this one is true, what should I do? If this one is true, what should I do? I can find other people who also commit to these claims and I can reason through them together. Or think about like in moral philosophy, there are lots of different moral traditions. So one moral tradition is utilitarianism. That's sort of like the core claim of that tradition is that you should do things that have the best consequences. That's contrasted with other traditions like virtue theory and Kantianism. If utilitarianism is true, there's a benefit to just assuming it's true and just thinking about what to do in light of it being true. You don't have to like also think about what you should do if virtue theory is true, also think about what you should do if Kantian ethics is true. You can find fellow utilitarians, you can like reason together about, I don't know, what causes should we give our money to that would maximize utility. So there are like advantages to committing to certain core claims if they're true. Okay, so in both these kinds of cases, interpersonal claims and core claims, we're going to meet the situation condition. So if we meet the situation condition, and then our evidence is such that we also meet the reliability and inconclusiveness condition, so we have a testifier that we think is generally reliable in that domain, and we ourselves are not that reliable, such that even if we disagree with the testifier, there's still a decent chance that the testifier is right. When we meet all three of these conditions, we should defer to the authority rather than reasoning through the matter by ourselves. Okay, so we now have an epistemic version of the testimonial deference account. To have faith in an authority is to believe or to be willing to believe claims on the basis of the authority's testimony, even if your own reasoning about these claims is silent or implies their falsity. To have faith that a claim holds is to believe this claim because one has faith in an authority. And what we've just reasoned through, or what I've just argued, is that it is sometimes rational to defer to an authority about what to believe without reasoning through the matter yourself, and to continue to defer to the authority about what to believe, even if you do reason through the matter yourself and come to a different conclusion than the authority. So that's the sort of like abstract view. If you meet these three conditions, then it's going to be rational to defer to an authority rather than to reason through yourself, and to continue to defer even when you think they're wrong, which is kind of a surprising claim, by the way. Like, I think they're wrong, but like nonetheless, I'm believing what they're saying, right? That's like a surprising kind of thing. So we've talked about the sort of abstract conditions. Now I want to look at 4 cases in which people often do defer to authorities, or often think maybe they should, or they're often told to. And I want to argue that in each of these cases, the conditions are met. So actually, these are cases in which you should defer to an authority rather than reasoning through the matter yourself. And in fact, like this story I've just been giving you about when and why it's rational to do so, like explains some key features of these cases. Okay. So let's start with domain experts. So this is like probably the largest class of cases in which we defer to someone else, and probably the class of cases in which we're like most easily accept that that's a good idea. So think about various domain experts. So scientists are experts on scientific findings. Professors are experts on the subject they teach. Doctors are experts on your health and on health in general. Woodworkers are experts on how to make furniture. Artists are experts on how to make good art. Wine tasters are experts on what's the flavor of this particular wine. To trust an authority in one of these domains is to defer to that authority both practically and epistemically, even if you reason through the matter yourself and come to a different conclusion. So if your physics professor tells you, like, here's the answer to problem 10, and you reason through it, and you think the physics professor is wrong, to defer to them is to, like, nonetheless consider the physics professor to have the correct answer and you to have the wrong answer. Or if you defer to a woodworker as an expert in the domain of how to make furniture, then if you're like an apprentice woodworker and your authority is telling you assemble the cabinet in this way, even if it seems wrong to you, you do it. Okay. So is that rational? My claim is yes. Treating a domain expert as an authority is often or typically rational. One situation with respect to the expert satisfies the reliability, inconclusiveness, and situation condition. Okay. So why does it satisfy the reliability condition? This is the condition that the expert is apt, there's a high probability the expert is correct. Well, that's partly what it is to be an expert, or what it is to recognize someone as an expert is to think they're reliable in this domain. In fact, when somebody has a credential, that's like often what the credential indicates. So they've gone through like processes, or they've been tested such that they are reliable in this domain. So that's like pretty easy. What about the inconclusiveness condition? Well, this is typically met in the case in which I'm a novice in a subject area. And not just for the obvious reason that I don't know what I'm talking about when I'm a novice, but for the less obvious reason that when I'm a novice, I often don't even know the types of mistakes I could make. So often, my reasoning through the matter is unsound because I don't understand what sound reasoning is in this domain. And finally, often we meet the situation condition. So in the practical things like assembling the cabinet or taking a course of medicine, maybe it's more obvious that there are benefits to committing to do it in a certain way and costs to backing out. But I think this is even true in some of these more intellectual cases, like the case of the physics student. I think if the physics student commits to following what her teacher says, then she'll be more apt to figure out her own errors. She'll use her professor's calculations in other problems and be more likely to get them right. So even though it seems like it doesn't seem obvious that that's an area in which like committing to believe something makes a difference, it can. And notice the typical progression of expertise in these areas also sort of follows the typical progression that we see for faith generally. So first, the expert establishes a reliable track record, or you're sort of like looking around for an expert, and you pick one on the basis of their track record or a credential that indicates that they are reliable. Then you commit to following what they say. After that, you're sort of immediately in case one, where you know so little that even if you reason through it yourself, their chance of being correct is just like really, really high. Then as you progress and get more information, you end up in case two, where you're like good at reasoning about the thing, but even so, you're sort of like just as likely to be correct as the expert. Finally, if you go on, then you yourself become an expert and you can drop reliance on the expert. But notice that it's sort of like important to go through case one and case two in order to become an expert yourself. Here's another case in which people often defer to the authority of somebody else. Call them interpersonal advisors. So these are things like, that people that help tell us what to do, like morally or action-wise or emotionally. So I have friends that I go to for advice, maybe my parents, maybe a therapist, maybe if I'm in a 12-step program, my sponsor, maybe if I'm religious, my priest or rabbi or imam. And notice that to treat any one of these people as an authority isn't just to take advice from them and like weigh it against other things that I think. It's to follow their directives even when I disagree with them. Okay, so is that a good idea? My claim, yes. Treating an advisor as an authority is often rational. In fact, it would very likely be a mistake to not have interpersonal advisors as authorities, even in moral matters, or especially in moral and practical matters. Okay, so in this case, I think the reliability and situation condition are like fairly straightforward. So somebody is reliable if you think they have a good track record. So your friend is going to meet the reliability condition if they tend to give you really good advice about what to do. Your rabbi is going to meet the reliability condition if they tend to be right about what you should do. And we often meet the situation condition in moral matters or interpersonal matters. For example, if I'm deciding whether to cheat on a test, I'm deciding whether to cheat on a romantic partner, I'm deciding whether to apologize to a friend when I'm not sure whether I was in the wrong or not. All of these things are cases in which, like, I don't just want to do the wrong thing and apologize for it later. It's better to do the right thing now, and it's better to commit to doing it. What about the inconclusiveness condition? When is it going to be the case that even if I reason through moral matters myself and come to a different conclusion from the advisor, there's still a pretty good chance that I'm wrong? A couple cases. First, matters on which I'm like a novice and the advisor is an expert. So we might think of something like, say your parents have been married for 50 years. Maybe you could think they're like an expert on how to get along with a romantic partner, whereas like I've only been married a few years, and so I'm a novice with respect to that. That means that given their track record and mine, often when I reason through myself what to do, I'm going to be wrong. Second, there are many matters on which I'm apt to engage in motivated reasoning. We should remind ourselves that temptation doesn't always work by making me think that action looks tempting even though it's bad. Often temptation works by affecting my reasoning about the action. So I'm thinking, should I cheat on this test? It's not that I think, no, I shouldn't, but I want to. I sort of think, well, normally people shouldn't cheat, but this case is different. Like, I studied, and so I should get an A. I just, can't remember, or, how bad is it really to cheat? So, the way in which temptation works often is to make you engage in reasoning that will lead you to the wrong conclusion. about right and wrong. So that's another case in which, even when I reason through a matter myself, I'm less likely to get it right than I might be otherwise. And in particular, my advisor who has like the, who might not be in my exact situation, but has a more objective perspective, is at least as likely to get it right as I am. Finally, moral or practical matters where the advised action is something difficult to do. So if the advised action is, apologize to my friend when I really don't want to, or or cases like that, then again, I'm likely to reason to the wrong answer about what to do, just because of punishment. So given this, it's not just that it's okay to like farm out your moral reasoning to an authority. In fact, it very likely would be a mistake to treat no one as an advisor in this situation. If you always follow your own compass, you'll actually be wrong more often than you would like, and you'll miss out on some of the benefits of following an authority instead. All right, 2 more cases. So first I want to think about traditions and religious traditions in particular. So there are many elements that are taken to be authoritative in various religious traditions. Often different branches of the same overall tradition take different things to be authoritative, but here are just some of the things that religious traditions take to be authoritative. So various texts, the Christian Bible, the Torah, the Quran. It's supposed to be the case that they're authoritative or true in some sense of the word true. Certain people are taken to be authoritative. Moses, Muhammad, the ancient sages. Maybe a religious body is taken to be authoritative. So in Catholicism, the magisterium, which is like a body of higher-ups, is taken to be authoritative. In many branches of Christianity, ecumenical councils, which is like when the whole Christian church gets together and decides something, are taken to be authoritative. Sometimes tradition itself is just taken to be authoritative. If you think of tradition itself as like a consensus with a particular history, often people think that Judaism works in this way, so maybe it's not that these particular words are authoritative, but what's authoritative is the debates among rabbis over time and what emerges out of that. Again, as I said, different interpretations of these various religions often take different elements to be authoritative. Okay, so again, to take these elements to be authoritative would be to defer to them, even if reasoning through the matter yourself you disagree. So I say, read the Quran, it says, do this thing, I think doing this thing would be a bad idea. Or the Christian church gets together and says, we should all believe this thing. I reason through it, I think this thing is false. Nonetheless, I do this thing, or I believe this thing. So that's what it is to treat these various things as authoritative. And I claim, and I bet you can guess what I claim at this point. I claim sometimes this is a good idea. Sometimes we meet the reliability, inconclusiveness, and situation conditions. So first let's think about the reliability and inconclusiveness conditions. What are the ways to end up believing that, and to end up rationally believing that one of these authoritative sources in a religion is likely to get it right? I think there are 3 major sources, and by the way, what I'm saying here isn't that there's some element of religious tradition that is rational for all, that we should all think has a 90% chance of being correct. What I'm saying is that for many, or even most people, there will be some authority such that the kind of evidence that person has should make them think this tradition meets those conditions. Okay. So one way, this is the kind of thing we often talk about in philosophy, you might think that some people think that looking at objective evidence, ordinary arguments for various of these traditions or religious claims shows their reliability. I'm not going to say a lot more about that, but that is a viewpoint. I think maybe a more interesting viewpoint is one on which different sources of authority could be rationally thought to be reliable depending on how you're situated. So one way that you might reason, you might think like, here are the claims I'm like antecedently inclined to think are true, or like, here's what I think the moral universe looks like. When I read one of these religious texts, it describes the moral universe correctly. And in fact, in times when I disagree with it, I've often later come to see that I was wrong and it was correct. That's like one way to establish a reliable track record. Another way to establish a reliable track record is just to think about characteristics of the tradition in which you grew up. Often, you will find yourself in a position in which you should think that tradition is reliable. Maybe your community contains people that are very thoughtful and have like worked on the tradition. Maybe your community is trustworthy in other domains, like the domain of science and morality. So that's at least some evidence that it should be trustworthy in this domain. Maybe the people that you take to be authoritative take some of these elements to be authoritative. So maybe you have like an advisor that you like rely on, or your parents or someone that you rely on that you think has a really good track record, and they in turn farm out their authority to one of these texts. So I think people can meet these conditions even if we don't all meet them with respect to one single element of tradition. Okay. And finally, I think often in the case of religious traditions, we meet the situation condition. So religion has like both elements of interpersonal life and elements of like, and it has core claims. So for the same reasons that can be good to commit or to always like have a track record of believing something about your friend, similar thing might hold with respect to God or whatever deity is part of the religion. And committing to one of the core claims of one of these traditions can also, if it's true, can be a way to like help you reason about other matters in the same way that like committing to a scientific program can help you reason through scientific matters. Okay, finally, one classic case in which many people take someone to have authority is the case of God. And here I'm thinking about just like if we take certain religious traditions, stories at face value. So for example, here are some things that like God is supposed to do according to some religious traditions. So God tells Noah to build an ark. God tells Abraham his descendants will be as numerous as the stars. God tells Moses to lead his people out of Egypt. God speaks through the prophets and tells his people that bad things will happen if they don't repent. An angel of God tells Mary she will bear a child, and so forth. So if we take these stories at face value, notice that they meet the conditions I've been talking about here. So first, in the case of the reliability conditions, it's usually not just the case that God appears to one of these people in a vacuum. Usually one of two things is the case. Either, again, taking the story at face value, the person has a track record of interacting with God before taking God's commands to be authoritative, or God showing up and telling someone something is accompanied by miraculous occurrences that ought to raise the recipient's probability that they're speaking with God. So again, like in these stories, it's usually not the case that the person should like take the testimony of God on blind faith. Instead, it's sort of like trust God, given that God has met the reliability condition. And similarly for the inconclusiveness condition, in each story, the recipient of the testimony has some reason to think God's pronouncements are wrong. The claims that God says are often laughable or surprising, that an old couple or a virgin will have a child, or that food will appear in the desert every day. But nonetheless, God's track record or the accompanying miraculous signs should weigh against the seeming falseness of the pronouncement. So we should be in the condition in which, even if we reason through the matter ourselves, given the track record, we ought to think that there's still a good chance that God is correct, not us. And finally, this sort of point that sometimes it's going to be rational to defer to God, if there's a person that you have some reason to believe it is God, undermines one kind of argument against the existence of God. So there's this argument due to James Rachel's that you should never, like, a God couldn't exist, because if God exists, he's the kind of thing that you should take to be an authority, but we should never farm out our authority to anyone else. So in other words, like, nothing could be God, because nothing could be such that it's worthy of taking to be an authority. If I'm right here, then that undermines this argument, because actually, under certain conditions, you do better by farming your actions and your beliefs out to an authority than you do by simply doing what you think you ought to do. So while there might be some advantages to reasoning through the matter yourself, there's also going to be advantages to following an authority, and in certain conditions, the advantages of the second type are stronger than the advantages of the first type. Okay, so I see that I'm out of time, so just to sort of summarize what I've done, I've given you a general account of faith that I think handles both cases of religious faith and mundane faith. I've explained how deferring to an authority, regardless of what you yourself think, is a special case of this kind of faith. I've argued that faith generally and deference to authority in particular can be rational under certain conditions, in particular when the authority, you have evidence that the authority is reliable, when you have evidence that even if you reason through the matter yourself, you're not sort of like certain to get it correct, and in which you're in a situation in which acting now or committing is beneficial. I've then gone through and applied this account to 3 types of cases in which you might be wondering whether we should defer to an authority, and I've argued that in all 3 cases, the answer is sometimes yes, we should. The cases are experts within a domain, interpersonal advisors about what we should do in our personal or relationship or moral life, religious traditions with certain elements taken to be authoritative, or if we sort of put ourselves into stories in which God is said to interact with people in these cases. So that's the talk. Thank you guys for listening, and I look forward to
So thank you, Lara, for the presentation. You can bring the microphone around, but I will ask that everybody ask questions on the microphone because we have a live stream.
And no question is too basic or too weird. So if you want to talk about something, probably someone else in the room wants to talk about it. So raise it, even if they don't, I want to talk to you about it. And undergraduates especially, please ask questions.
Thank you. It was a wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it. I don't know if this might be one of those questions that very, not very good. But I'm going to defer to the authority. So that you know the more paradoxical statements instead of saying, there's beer in the fridge, but I don't believe there's beer in the fridge. It seems paradoxical. It's even paradoxical to think it. I'm just wondering, what you were suggesting sounds like it might get into something like a more paradoxical situation, because you did say at one point you're going to make me a case that's rational for me to think that what the authority says here is wrong, but I should believe it. But I'm wondering if I think that they're wrong, whether I could actually believe it.
No, that's a great question. So yeah, thank you. I think that's a really excellent question. I think there are different ways to think about belief, and there are different ways to think about reasoning through the matter yourself. And some of these are going to be compatible with each other. Some of these are going to give rise to like a worry that I just can't do these things. So a couple things to note. One thing to note is that in order for when we're talking about the inconclusiveness condition, it's generally not going to be the case that sort of like all things considered, you should disbelieve the thing. There's going to be like this one thing which is like the conclusion of my reasoning, and this other thing which is what the authority says, and when you sort of add them together, you're going to say, all things considered, I don't know what to think. So I think it's easier to think that that type of attitude is compatible with belief than the attitude that's like, I disbelieve it, or like, I think it's false, but nonetheless, I believe it. Maybe another thing to say is that, well, let's just take the simplest case of like my reasoning about a physics problem. So I do the math, and I'm like, the answer is 6. And my physics professor says the answer is 7. What's the state I'm in? Or what's the state I'm recommending that I be in this situation is to say, well, according to my best reasoning, it's 6. Nonetheless, I should believe it's 7. Those things aren't like quite in as much tension, I think, as the truth is that it's 6, but I'll believe that it's 7. So I guess I'm thinking of my stream of reasoning as like one element that goes into what I think overall. And what I'm saying is there are kind of two views, and one is the one that I think actually we often promulgate in the philosophy classroom, which is that my stream of reasoning, that's everything. I should always believe the conclusion of my stream of reasoning because I'm the ultimate, it's like everything gets filtered through me, and what else can I do? And I'm saying, no, actually that's sort of one source, and it should combine with these other sources, including what authorities say, to give me an all things considered what to believe. So yeah, I guess, and then hopefully it sounds okay if we translate it into these other contexts, like when I really think about it, doing my own research and even taking into account that this person's an authority, I come to the conclusion that I shouldn't take the medical treatment. Nonetheless, this doctor says I should take it, so I'm going to take it. Okay, I take it. I guess that's about action, not belief. But like, also I could think, and maybe I believe it or believe these claims in the sense that I like go with it, something like that. Does that help? You think?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to follow.
Yeah.
I was wondering, is it really important that you cash it out these epistemic conditions in terms of belief? Could you just say what you want to say using a different attitude, like accept?
Accept. Yeah. That's one thing that I could do. I think I could say that, but then I also think that it's like that. Then I think whatever the attitude I'm talking about here is pretty central to epistemic life. So if I say accept here, then I think I want to say that acceptance is like the attitude that pervades our epistemic life, given how much we rely on the testimony of authorities. Which maybe that's fine. Maybe we'd say, yeah.
Thanks. That was really great. Now this is a stranger question. So you mentioned Isaac and Abraham in your talk.
Yeah.
That led me to think about Kierkegaard.
Yeah.
And I was looking at the title, Faith and Rational Deference to Authority, and then you talked about the risky commitment account of faith, and that strikes me as a very Kierkegaardian position where, you know, you have faith in something because of the virtue of what it is. Yeah. So I'm just wondering if if faith in that sense is not living in a epistemic position, whereas deference, the stuff we talk about later, that sounds to me more like trust. And I was wondering if you could say if you think distinction between faith and trust.
Good, yeah, thank you, yeah. I love Kierkegaard, so I'm happy to have you notice that there's some similarities between our views, which I think is absolutely correct. So yeah, I do think, primarily I think of faith as an action rather than a belief or as a commitment. I think it's a sort of mistake to categorize faith as primarily epistemic, as opposed to like action. What is that faith? Like to go out and do stuff. So the sort of more general account is an account of commitment and action, and even the sort of the practical version of the deference bit, that's an action. So I should take this course of medical treatment. I should, my friend says like, no, don't drink that second beer. I should not drink that second beer. Like these are all actions. But I also think that belief, or we could say acceptance, is like a specific kind of action. Now you can like reject the idea. You reject the idea that faith ever involves believing things. Like you just reject this account of belief. Like, that's not what it is. It's not like accepting risky things. It just follows what I think, as you were saying in the case of Moore's paradox. And I think you would still have the fundamental features of my account of faith, which are the practical ones. Though I think it's also interesting, and I also accept that we can think of belief as a certain kind of action and commitment also. And now you asked about the relationship between faith and trust. I think those are like very close to being the same attitude. So I think faith is like a matter of trust. They're nearly synonyms. I don't think they're quite synonyms because I don't think we can use them in all of the same cases. I'm trying to think of like what are some cases in which can you think of cases in which like we have trust but not faith, or faith but not trust?
Right, well, I can trust my lawyer, for example, right, to represent me. I have faith that God will not desert me.
Okay.
And I think those are sort of underwritten by different conditions of relationship to the lawyer.
Good, yeah, so some people talk about trust as being justified for some broad reasons, like I can put my trust in someone not because I think that they'll do it, but because it's a good idea. So I trust my kid to clean his room. I don't actually think he'll do it, but I think it's like a good idea to give him some trust and responsibility. I don't think I have faith in him to clean it. In fact, I know he's not going to. He's just not going to do it, right? So maybe a key difference has to do with the reasons for it.
Yeah, I'm talking about faith against evidence, whereas having trust, I can give you some evidence for. And I think maybe one of the things that distinguishes is faith doesn't rely on evidence quite in the same way.
Interesting. I've been slightly arguing for the opposite thing, and also in the case of cleaning my son cleaning his room, it's like totally against the evidence. He's not going to do it, but I'm going to trust him to do it. And then I've been arguing actually that faith is only a good thing to have if you have the evidence on which it's based. Although faith can survive. I mean, part of what I've been arguing with the inconclusiveness condition is that faith can survive certain changes in your evidence that would make it rational not to adopt faith if you didn't already have it. I wonder if trust is like that, where when you get evidence against your trust, it's not as like sticky or something. But yeah, it's a great question.
Well, before a third professor asks a question, I'm going to turn around and yes, I'm going to hand the mic over to some students.
Thank you. Thanks for speaking. My question is, assuming that I believe in God or a higher power, and I start to look into different religions and look into the evidence of whether it's true or not, at what point do I settle on one and accept that this is true, I'm going to defer to this authority, versus I still need to search and look at other ones?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it also sort of speaks to this phenomenon of conversion. So you might believe in one tradition, maybe the one you grew up in, and then you start looking at the evidence, and you're like, this seems false, and this other one seems better. So I think one of the virtues of so just to answer your question in general terms, I mean, I'm not going to unfortunately be able to say once you've done X, Y, and Z readings, then you decide. But the basic answer is, there's an answer from the point of view of before you decide to commit in the first place, and then there's an answer to the question, when do I feel like I've had enough evidence enough counter evidence that I should jettison my commitment? In the case of the first question, so when am I going to meet the conditions where I think this thing's probably high probability that it's reliable, and future evidence probably isn't going to put me in a state of thinking that it's unreliable. In order to get to that state, you need to feel like you've sampled enough varieties of evidence. Because if you just say sampled one kind of evidence, so say you just read this one particular text and nothing else, then you sort of know as far as that text is concerned, your probability is pretty high, but you don't know that you might find something in the other kinds of sources that will lower it. So you're not going to meet this inconclusiveness condition. Future evidence might make you think this thing is really unlikely. So for the first, when do I commit, I would say sampling a variety of sources, which doesn't need to mean texts of various religions. It could mean texts in this case, plus people you trust, plus let me try living my life in a Christian way, see how that goes. Let me try living my life in a Jewish way, see how that goes, etc. So sort of you need to be confident enough based on sampling a wide variety of evidence, and then the question of what if I'm already committed to something, and then it looks like I keep getting evidence that it's false. So I thought my religion predicted this thing would happen if I did this, not the case at all. My life should go really well if I did this, but that is false. My view says that you should stick it out longer than you might think, but not indefinitely. So if there's a sort of a long period in which if you get some evidence where it's just pretty conclusively against it, or you're in a period of doubt for a long enough time, that might make the benefits of commitment no longer worth it. And I think maybe you can sort of think of it too by analogy with, say, choosing a partner or choosing a good friend. You don't want to partner up after the first date, but you don't want to kind of wait forever. So there's this point at which you've seen them in a wide variety of situations, you've been with them long enough, even though you're not certain, it's you got enough evidence to make the commitment. And then similarly, say you've made a commitment marriage or a similar kind of partnership, you should like stick it out longer than you would otherwise. But if, you know, you walk in on them engaged in infidelity or something, like, then you don't have to stick it out forever. Thank you. Sure.
Let's pause for a second.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, so if you need to pass to another class, why don't you do so now?
Thank you guys for coming. Enjoy your next class.
Thank you.
All right, we'll wait a couple more seconds and we'll.
So I was wondering, is the having faith can be considered as a form of encouragement? Like if you say that I have faith in certain things, if you believe that this certain things will actually happen.
Right.
But if you, like your example are saying that you believe, I mean, you have faith that your son is doing this, because here's the possibility of your son actually doing it. Is that considered as faith?
Good, or I have faith that you'll pass the test. Often I say that as like, you can do it. I believe in you. Yeah, I do think that's considered faith. Maybe two things to say about that case. One, what you're doing is reassuring the person that you do have some good evidence. I think if faith meant belief without evidence, then actually that wouldn't be an encouraging thing to say. You know, you're like, I have faith that you'll pass the test. Faith? You mean you think I won't? You know, so I actually think that tells us that faith is that to have faith in something is to say that you have some evidence, you know, good evidence in its favor, and that's one thing that declaration shows us. And then there's this other phenomenon where sometimes my saying things like that can raise the probability of you're actually doing it. So in a certain sense, I'm creating some evidence that you'll pass the test. You know, I'm like, you can do it, I have faith. That makes you like more apt to do it. So for both those reasons, I think that's why we make those encouraging declarations. And it is truly a case of faith when you say those kinds of things.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you for the talk, and I really enjoyed it. I'm thinking, what I'm going to say might sound kind of intuitive, but it seems that the deference for, the case for deference for interpersonal advisement seems to be stronger than the example you take for scientists.
Okay.
The reason I'm saying that is that when it comes to morality, the things we looking at are not external, they're internal. So we have social and cultural factors involved. So we might say that this particular person who's talking about morality may be very good at it because it has a significant time reflecting on it. Because it's in that morality so you can get internally. When it comes to scientific, the laws are external to us. So if I'm at an inconclusive level and I'm doing the same thing as a scientist, I can argue that the scientist is from the old guard if I'm using Thomas Kuhn's ideas. You know what? Since we're 50-50 and I know you're from the old guard, you may be dogmatic, guess what? I may have more rationality to actually take my case when I'm at an inclusive level. What do you think?
So what do I think about whether these cases are importantly different or about each one in particular?
No, I'm just saying, I think that the deference is for interpersonal advising is stronger than the one for scientists.
Good.
Because when it comes to the scientists, if I'm at the level of inconclusiveness, we do the same thinking, and we know the laws of nature are external. So it's not that scientists has a special case to discovering like scientific laws. So since we have the same reasoning, we have the same epistemic level when it comes to reasoning, and I also know that you're much older than I am, you could be more dogmatic than I am. You may be more committed to your ideas.
Right.
So it could be that I can argue that using Thomas Kuhn's theory that, okay, I'm giving more credence to my belief now because I know you might be dogmatic. Right?
Good, yeah. So often the way science progresses is by people challenging authorities. And so if the result of this talk was never challenge the authority or always believe what the authority says, then the conclusion of this talk is don't progress science any further. That would be bad. So I think you make a really excellent point. And this is, I think, similar to the case that you asked about of, when should I let go of a religion or convert? There's a reason that Thomas Kuhn, the scientific paradigms that he talks about, I think he even specifically likens it to the case of religion and talks about conversion from one paradigm to another. It's not just I believe this, now I believe this other thing. So I think, a couple things to say. One is that often, and I think Kuhn himself thinks this, that often the way science progresses isn't by everyone behaving rationally. So people that get stuck on their weird theory and follow it through and then ends up being correct, often they're like more ornery than they should have been. I think you see that in philosophy. Often the new philosophical theories come out of unreasonably stubborn people. So it might be that science actually, there's a bit of irrationality in the progression of science, or it might be that what the stubborn people are doing isn't like not accepting the current paradigm. It's instead they're believing the current paradigm, but they're like working on something else, because if that something else was true, that would be amazing. And maybe this goes to your question about acceptance versus belief too. So I think, and I think it's also worth noting that the changing from the old paradigm to the new paradigm is usually done by someone who's already an expert in science. It's like not going to be the guy sitting next to you in physics class that's like, no, you're wrong. Everything is made of soup, right? Like that's, and so I think what I'm saying with respect to expertise is that you should defer to authorities until the point at which you yourself are an authority as well. And then neither person is going to be deferring to each other. So science, it's sort of more complicated than...
Even at the inconclusive level?
So what I'm arguing is that if it's the case that this inconclusiveness condition is met, so you're already committed to the listening to the authority, and you did that because there are benefits to committing, and because there's sort of like bad possibilities either way. You could be wrong, or they could be wrong. So you should defer to the authority. Now, if a long time goes by and you still disagree with the authority, this is like the case of religion, like a long time goes by and you still have your doubts, or you still think maybe this thing isn't right, or you come up with something that's conclusive in the opposite direction. Like, I wish I could cite one of Einstein's experiments, but I don't know. There's like, I guess this isn't Einstein, but like when we're shooting a particle and through a cardboard with slits in it, and we show that it's like actually light is not a particle. So if you you could sort of either come up with something that, like, from your point of view, refutes the paradigm, or you could be in doubt about its truth for long enough. Those would be the conditions under which you then drop your commitment, similar to the case of dropping the commitment to a religion.
I see Nika. By the way, I'm glad I handed the mic over, because you asked my questions so much more eloquently than I would.
I almost couldn't get past the initial definition of faith.
Okay.
Maybe it's perhaps because I define it as pretty much blind faith. So, for my definition, faith would be an act of belief that persists with absence of evidence or lack of sufficient evidence. So if God has a track record of miracles that are substantiated, that wouldn't constitute some sort of evidence for me to a certain extent, and it wouldn't be an act of faith anymore. So if I have trust in a friend or faith in a friend from previous cases that they're reliable, then in what sense would that be faith?
Good, yeah. Great question. I do think a lot of people think of faith in the way that you're thinking of it, that faith means belief without the evidence, or, there's sort of this Mark Twain quote, like, having faith means believing in something that you know ain't so. I think that's like a common way to think about faith, at least in our sort of contemporary world, but I think it doesn't fit cases of, it doesn't fit cases of religious people having faith. It doesn't fit what they say about their own faith. It doesn't fit with like the stories they believe are exemplars of faith. So, Moses having faith in God, it's not supposed to be blind trust. It's supposed to be God is this guy that Moses has interacted with a lot. He's seen that he takes care of him and so forth. A miraculous sign is shown, so that's evidence. I think in cases of friendship or faith in, say, like a spouse, you don't think, when you say, like, I have faith in my friend, it's not blind faith. You think, I have faith in my friend because this friend's got a good track record of this particular thing. So I think the definition of faith that I've given sort of better fits the evidence of like how people use the term, what stories are taken to be exemplary of faith, and how faith sort of like functions in religious and interpersonal contexts, than that other definition of faith as blind faith. Perfectly open to there being like multiple terms that mean different things. So maybe sometimes when people talk about faith, they mean blind faith, but I'm trying to like elucidate that attitude that I take to be important for like religion and friendship and science. And so my claim is that this is the attitude that like people are aiming for in those particular debates. But feel free to follow up if you want.
It's just, I would feel much better if we had a better term that would separate the different distinctions between, his faith is just, generally loaded term, how we use it. So if we had more, terms that we could communicate different instances, then I think.
Good. I mean, we could call this like.
You have a word for it?
Well, I do want to stick on to the word faith because it's part of my. What'd you say?
The same faith with a PH.
Yes. I do think this is an attitude that the term sometimes maps onto. So I don't take myself to be creating a new attitude and saying, love this attitude, let's talk about this. I take this to be one of the core meanings of the term faith. But if you want to sort of separate them, and I'm happy to say like, oh, there's one meaning of faith, blind faith. Let's call this, this thing blind faith. I'm happy to call this like faith, the core religious attitude or something like that. Although I also think it operates in interpersonal context. You call it like, I don't know, evidence-based faith or something like, although actually part of my point, I don't think you need evidence to have faith. I think faith is only rational if you have evidence. So I think anytime you're committing to something, regardless of counter evidence, you have faith. So there's like bad faith and good faith. So I could like say, I don't know, hey you, like watch my laptop, even though you've like clearly got a stolen laptop dealership going. Like I do count as having faith. it's just a bad case because it's irrational. So I want to talk about what it is to have faith, and then the background conditions determine whether it's rational or not. So yeah, I don't know, is there another good name like faith, commitment faith, or something like that?
I don't know, in most cases, we would use trust, I feel like, rather than faith, and like trust in a friend or faith in a friend, but it sort of doesn't correspond to blind faith in those cases.
So yeah, so I mean, trust is, so faith as trust, you could use for this account. And then if you want to just use the word trust, that's fine, but then the core claim would have to be that, like, when religious people talk about faith, they ought to be talking about trust, because that's the thing they need. I mean, I think, in the so there's this recent book called like Roman faith and Christian faith or something. It's about how this term was used around 0 AD, and it does have, or 1 AD, there is no 0 AD, but it has originally, I think, had connotations of trust in the sense of like operating within a market, if that makes sense. So this is like, I do think I'm like glomming on to an important historical meaning of the term. And in fact, like part of why I started thinking about testimony in the first place is a lot of medieval philosophers just use the term faith to mean deference to an authority. I think there's been some drift in the last 500 years, and we have acquired this notion of blind faith. And I think particularly when a person is looking at a religious person and wants to criticize them, I think that's like a kind of criticism, like, oh, faith means blind faith, so you guys are doing something bad. I think there are very few religious people that take themselves to be having blind faith. So, although I mean, I agree, that's a type of thing that could happen to anybody. But I guess I want to I guess the term I'm interested in is like the one that's really at the core of religion and other enterprises. I'm fine to call it trust, but historically it's been called faith. Is there a follow-up on that by someone?
This is also sort of a question about the general account of faith. I don't think it's an objection, it's maybe a request for elaboration. So like, if you take a claim on faith, it seems like it's going to be sort of integrated with some chunks of your sort of web of belief and not others. So like, maybe if I suppose I have certain reasons for believing that God doesn't exist. So if God exists, then the world is perfect. Or if God exists, then it's not a problem for a person to die young because they're committed. And then I take it on faith, I talk to my rabbi, and tell me that God exists. I don't thereby come to believe that the world is perfect and so it's fine. But I do integrate that belief with the belief in the existence of God with other parts of my life. Maybe that I thought I should spend more time going to synagogue or pray or something. So like it seems to be inferentially sort of isolated from some types of beliefs and inferentially integrated with others. And I wonder if you have any kind of account of when you do one and when you do.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point. I appreciate it. I guess so. Do you think it's genuinely inferentially isolated, or do you think it's just that I have two beliefs that are in conflict with each other and I don't know how to resolve it? Because it seems like you think the question of what to believe about God does bear on whether it's a tragedy to die young, but you just when you concentrate on whether it's a tragedy to die young, you just have these two contradictory beliefs, and you don't know how to like resolve them, which is like the case for lots of other stuff as well. So do you think it's inferentially isolated, or do you think I'm just in this case where I'm like stuck and I don't believe it?
I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm inclined more in the stuck type direction, because it seems like you would, if I took it on, if I took it on faith that God exists, I would also lower my credence in these other conditionals that I,
That it's like, that it's
so there's
Yeah.
inference
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah, that's interesting. Right.
So maybe stuck isn't right the right word, but inferential isolation also isn't right.
Right, yeah, but I heard a talk recently about this. This is a great problem to think about, that religious people, many or most of whom believe that like when their loved ones die, like something good will happen to them now or eventually, they don't experience like less grief than non-religious people, and they also don't think it's they don't think it's less bad. This is just like empirical studies. So it's like it's a puzzle, and this seems like a kind of belief where, and some ways to try to resolve this puzzle seem like not great. Like, oh, you don't really believe in your religion. Like that doesn't seem right. Or like, you don't really think it's a tragedy. You just like miss them a lot. Like that doesn't seem right either. So I think the phenomenon, I think there's something to this phenomenon you're pointing out, that they're isolated, and like so it's not just like there's tension. It's almost like the religious belief makes close to no difference in how people react. At least apparently after like a longer period, like after a year, the people who are religious feel like less grief, or like they have different traits with respect to this but like, yeah, at least in the immediate term, it appears that it makes no difference, and that's interesting. So yeah, I mean, I don't exactly know how to like integrate that with my account, but that seems like a really good point, and especially when I like how you put it, that they integrate sometimes and not other times, because it's also not the case that like the religious domain is just isolated. They're so right, like okay, I like believe in God, I give my money to these things, I pray, I like go to synagogue, but it's still just as sad as when somebody dies. Like what's going on there? And that's a really good. I don't know the answer to it, but I'm really glad that you raised the question. I think you raised the question.
The gentleman behind you to your left, and that's the last question.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the very generous and insightful discussion so far as well. I think I have one question and maybe 2 or 3 ways to ask it, and it has to do with this discussion that we having earlier about the word faith. And I'm trying to get clear on how different this is from sort of an internalist sort of Jungian account, where it's not like I don't listen to anybody, right? I make a rational belief about how much better at knowing this person is than me.
Yeah.
So I rationally believe that they are an authority, and as long as the evidence doesn't go against that, I continue to believe they're an authority. And I guess another way I might ask the question is, if I'm out in the wild and I see somebody doing something, can I distinguish between whether they believe it or whether they have faith in it? That's primarily.
Good. Yeah. Those are both great questions. Let me take them in reverse order. So if I see someone out in the world, can I distinguish belief from faith? I think yes. I think faith is, since faith involves commitment, it's like stickier than belief, so to speak. So the person that merely believes something, if they have evidence that comes into the contrary, then they're going to drop the belief, whereas the person who has faith is going to stick with it even when evidence to the contrary comes in. So I think that's the main way to distinguish them out in the wild, how they respond to additional evidence, and maybe whether they want additional evidence for I mean, you could have faith and want additional evidence for some purposes, like you could have faith in God and want to look at arguments for God resistance to like convince other people, but you're not basing whether you go to synagogue on these additional arguments. So yeah, I think how you responded to how much you like want new evidence for purposes of your own beliefs, and also how much you respond to evidence by dropping the belief is going to be the main distinguishing factors between belief and faith. And then the question of like, thinking about the account of Hume, as you probably know, Hume was on the side of like, testimony is just another bit of evidence. You're saying something is just like my finding it written down on a rock and knowing that like things written on rocks tend to like have high probability or whatever. I want to say that that it's different from that. And the way in which it's different is that I commit to taking you to be an authority, and then when I reason through the matter myself, even sort of like taking account of how reliable you are in that reasoning, I still should go with you. So I think of the difference from the Humean account is like this commitment bit, and maybe again like how this thing works over time. So the difference between the Humean that treats you as just like a rock is in how they respond to challenges or counter evidence to what you say. Great question. Thank you for it.
Okay, thank you, Lara, for Professor Buchak. I know there are several questions and follow-up questions that went unasked. That's a good sign that it was a rich debate. Hopefully we can continue conversation informally as soon as we're done, and I'm sure Nathan wants to see her mother. So let's thank Professor Buchak for a wonderful.
Great questions, you guys. Thank you so much.